Okay, so you've got a group of metagamers, or like me, you've got a small army of players at your home table, and you need to figure out stuff for them to fight. I feel you. And on this episode of Dragons and Dice, that's what we're going to do. We're going to beef up some monster stat blocks to keep those metagamers on their toes. Welcome to Dragons and Dice. So I'm a huge fan of magic items in D&D. I've just one of those like loot junkies. And so as a DM, I really enjoy giving out interesting loot. As you can probably tell by, I do a homebrew item every week. But the problem with that is a lot of times that makes your party super overpowered. And here are 5 things that I do to try to even out combat, even when you've got an OP party. And the first of these is I use mobs of minions leading up to a big fight as a way to whittle them down. I have a special add-on for the stat blocks that can be either generals or like mothers or fathers of groups of animals. And then the other thing I like to do is waves of enemies. And then finally, the last 2 techniques, if those don't work, I will just beef up existing stat blocks. Or when all else fails, we'll do full custom monsters that are completely homebrewed to fight your particular party. So let's check those out. Okay, first up on our list is going to be mobs of minions. And so if you've got a group of murder hobos that's just weaving a bloody trail through your world and you can't find enough stuff for them to fight to be challenging, you can always just grab bigger monsters, but that can sometimes have adverse effects to the surrounding areas. I mean, if you have CR 12 and up monsters in an area, they're going to have effects on the town and the region. And as the DM, you have every right to hand wave the consequences of those and drop a dragon on the party if that's what you choose to do. But if you want to keep it more in line with what the feel of your game should be and what should be in the areas regionally, the first thing I like to do is use mobs. And that's right, we're going back to a call out to 4th edition. I know that's blasphemy, but they work great, and they're a great way to get your party out of sorts before a main fight starts. And they're a useful tool to use to burn up some of the party's resources. If you don't know how minions work, they have 1 HP. They'll generally have a medium armor class, 13 to 16. And they'll normally be in big groups. And if you use a spell on them that has a save and they pass, they don't take any damage instead of half. That way you can't just be like, oh, I fireball and everything dies because it takes half damage. So if they pass, they take no damage. Same thing for other skills like Dragon's Breath and things like that. If they pass the save, they don't take any damage. And I generally put these in groups of like 4 to 6 and then treat each group like it's an individual monster. And I normally run these like a skill challenge or loose combat, and it will almost always be a theater of mind as, you can grit it out, but that takes a lot if you've got, 35 minions out there and you're trying to like put each one on its own little turn, roll initiative from all. So that's why I like to do the grouping, and it makes it quick and lets this be like a hybrid fight / skill challenge, and you can give the players a chance to do some creative and cinematic stuff. And an example would be like, you see 5 orcs running down a hallway toward you, and you're like, awesome. I'm going to turn them into a kebab with my glaive. And you'll be like, okay, give me a hit roll and an athletics check. And so that, fighter rolls a 17 and a 21. Like, dang, okay, you skewer the first one in the gut and ram your way right through the hall. Give me a strength check to see if you can get your glaive back. And that'll basically resolve like one set of the minions. And that's an example of a skill move that you could use instead of like a full-on combat attack. Because if you're like, fighter, you can't really kill 7 guys with one swing. But these are minions. They do them quick, and it's fun. And if you're a caster, this is going to be one of those times where they're always going to be like, oh man, there's so many people. I'm going to like throw a huge bomb and kill them all. And that kind of takes out the point of doing a mob of minions. And so the way I resolve that is I'll roll a save for the first creature that gets hit, but then for each additional creature, I'll add 1 with that save. So if the first person cast a fireball and their spell save DC is a 15 and I roll a 12, that fireball will kill the first 3, and then after that, it won't. And I just keep adding it up. So the first one got a 12, 13, 14, and then 15 was a save. And that's how you decide how many you kill if they use a big AoE spell. And this works really well because you don't want to waste the whole night rolling a save for every single minion that's got 1 HP. Just group them up, add 1 to each save, and then that's a good quick way to resolve the fight. And it keeps it fast. And that's kind of what these type of events are supposed to be, is like a high pace combat that lets people do like interesting fun things, and it also strips a little bit of resources away for them before you get to a big fight. And then if the mobs aren't all killed by the time that it gets to their turn to attack, I do something similar. So, okay, there's a druid, and I'm going to go attack her. And mwahaha, it's time to taste orcish steel. I'll roll one attack roll for the group, and then reduce that roll by 2 for each minion that's left in the mob. So let's say I rolled a 19, and the first one hits, and her armor class was a 14. The second one gets a 17, it hits. The third gets a 15, it hits. And then the rest of the mobs will all miss. And so after these mobs hit, what I like to do is I'll just take average damage, multiply it by the number that hit instead of rolling the damage die for each of those. And that's a quick and fair way, because if somebody wants to get hit by like all 5 minions and then you roll big on all the hits, it's like you're not trying to kill people with these type of encounters. It's just something like fun, cinematic, and quick. So just take the average. It keeps everything even for the entire group, and it works out really well. And the final way I like to resolve my minion fights is if you have really creative people at your table, you can let them do just straight skill checks. I mean, if you've got, there's nothing better than that bard trying to go legless on them, and ride a cart, smashing through the group of orcs, and, it's cinematic. It's really fun. You get to throw in a couple acrobatics checks, maybe a melee attack along the way, depending on what he calls out that he's doing. And once they've cleared up, the groups, just do it accordingly. If he passed all his checks, he wiped out the whole group of minions. And if not, he got, 4 of them, and one of them got to take an attack as he crashed his cart at the end. But these are cool ways to resolve combat that doesn't involve like gridding everything out. It gets to be theater of the mind, and I'm a big fan of that. Is it lets you be way more creative than being like, oh, did I move 5 squares or 6? Can I get to that guy? You just get to hand wave all that and go rule of cool on this. And I think it's a really fun way to throw in some extra combat for your parties. And then you get to go right back to your storyline, but you've kind of whittled a few HP off of them, and maybe some people burn some resources. And that's a good way to like dial up the fights to be a little bit harder for the next one that comes up in the campaign. Sometimes I have monsters that I really like and are area appropriate, but they just get a little outscaled by the party. And when this happens, what I like to do is I'll make a leader version or a mother or father version of the monster. And these are really simple to do. And after you've done one, you can just keep using it over and over, but don't overdo, obviously. One of the things I really love in D&D is owlbears. That felt good to say. And so they're CR3, which is fine for throwing a lot at them at higher parties. But if you just want to do a quick random encounter with owlbears, what I will do is I will throw in a few special ones. And so the way I do this is I'll make a mother version or a father version that has a special attack, and I set it up as a reaction or a triggered attack. And so if it's, let's say we make a mama owlbear, and the first time someone hits a different owlbear, she will then charge as a reaction on their turn, and it will be a dex save not to get knocked prone. I change the DC depending on how far away you are from the owlbear, as it makes sense, as you have more time to get away, lower save on the DC. And then if the owlbear gets to the person that hit the other one, it gets to make a bite and a claw attack. And this is nice because it can give you some options to add some chaos into the battlefield. If someone from the back line triggers this, now you have a mixed up battlefield, as that owlbear's now run through the group and made it to the back. And this makes for some really fun encounters. So all you need to do for this is write out whatever you want your special ability to be on a separate card, and then you can just add it in to any monster stat block that it makes sense for. And here's what I have for my owlbear mother edition. And I call it Enraged Charged, and this owlbear charges the person that triggered the attack. It can travel up to 3 times its speed to get there, and any person in a line must make a dex save. And I have these set up based off of how close they are to the charging monster. So if you're 5 feet away, it'll be a 22 dex save, as you don't have much time to get out of the way. 10 to 15 feet will be a 17 dex save. 20 to 30 feet away will be a 12 dex save, and over 30 feet will just be a 10. But the person who triggered the attack will roll with disadvantage, and each player that fails the save that's in the line gets knocked prone and takes 1d8, half on a save. And then the player that triggered the attack gets hit with the multi-attack like we talked about. So that owlbear will make a bite and a claw attack. A DM note on this: my special versions of monsters, I'll normally up the HP on to kind of show that they're a little bit special, and it gives you time for the party to trigger these attacks if it's something you're looking to be able to use against them. And so just, add an extra 25, 50 HP, whatever level equivalent it is that you need for your party to make sure that you get to use all the abilities that your monsters have and go from there. So that's a good template for beast and monstrosities and stuff that are kind of like animalish creatures. For humanoids, you can do the same thing. You make a leader or a general version, and you can do this for lower CR monsters to give them, a fighting chance. And I will do the same type of thing. I will make a special ability that can be added to one or two of the mobs, and then it can be used whenever you want. And here's the one I use for this. I call this one a motivating leadership. And while the leader is alive, all of its allies within 90 feet fight past death and refuse to die. And then, special note, critical hits will reduce their HP to 0, but otherwise, they just go to 1 HP and stay there until the general's killed. And this is nice for like orcs and gnolls and hobgoblins and the such, since it gives you, time to make a fight out of it, because those are such low CR things, but they're kind of D&D iconic too. And you can't really use them after like level 3 or first tier of play at the highest. And this is also fun because it forces the party to do some strategic work to get to the leader. And I would say that you do need to let the party know that something is up so that they have a chance to figure out what is going on. Maybe the orc leader can sound a horn and its brethren will pop up and keep fighting or something, because it's not really fair to just be like, oh, and that guy keeps going, and that guy keeps going. And you're like, what the heck? What's going on here? But if they know that this is an option in the game and then they can see like that he sounded a horn, it's a good way for them to have to be strategic in their fight and figure out a way to get to the back line and take out cut the head off the snake, so to say. It just makes for nice, more interesting combat, and I think that's always a good thing in D&D. It keeps you from being able to just be like, oh, I lock this guy up, and then I kill the first one, and then I kill the second one. It makes you kind of think ahead and try to figure out some good strategic ways of fighting. My third way of beefing up combat for big overpowered parties is that I will use waves of enemies. And this one is really simple, but it's an effective way to stretch out battles that might be getting over too quickly, and it'll let you burn off some extra cooldowns and some resources off of the party. And I mean, if you just put every monster out on the battlefield right off the rip, a lot of times they'll get CC'd and AoE'd in the first turn, and then the party just goes through systematically picking them off one by one, and it doesn't really cost them anything. It's just auto attacks and cantrips. But if you start at round 2 or in round 3 and have another group come in from a different side of the battlefield, if that's an area that you can do this in, it's a great way to kind of throw a curveball into your party, because now they're fighting a 2-front battle and they have, don't just get to put tanks up front and then, casters and ranged in the back. They've got to fight on 2 different sides and they have to pivot mid-fight. If you're planning on using this technique, what I like to do is I go ahead and roll initiative for the groups that I know are going to come in round 2 or round 4, whenever I have them planned to come in. But I don't tell the party about that until it's time for the group to take their turn. This keeps you from slowing down the combat mid-fight, because you're like, oh, wait, now I've got to roll, initiative for 6 more people that came in. You know from the start that you're going to have them pop up. Just go ahead and do it. And then when it's time for them to pop up, they come out. It gives a nice ebb and flow feel to the battle, because, oh, that party was just, walking through all your minions and now they're getting flanked. And it's going to make them have to figure out new strategy for the battle. And that kind of keeps it interesting and keeps it from being just a, Red Rover, type battle that can end up in 5e a lot. This fixes that, because now you've injected an extra group of people in. It's a 2-front war. People have to pivot. They've got, people coming in from the back that can possibly be attacking, the backline people who don't have great armor and all that. And it's a really fun way to keep battle to be a little more chaotic, as opposed to just we line up, we shoot them, they shoot us, and then back and forth until the party finally just mows everything down. This is another situation that is really good if you need to really add in some extra difficulty to it. That second group that comes in could have one of those special mobs like we talked about earlier. If it's a group of wolves, you get the Mama Dire Wolf that comes in and has a special attack. Or if it's a group of humanoids, the general or leader shows up, and now the fight has been like escalated from a little quick skirmish to, oh, this is actually going to take some doing. And I think that keeps it interesting. I will make a note. You don't need to overdo these. Every fight shouldn't have 6 different waves of people coming in. Sometimes there's only going to be, that mob of 4 little dudes over there. It's quick and it's done. Don't become predictable with your unpredictabilities, because you don't want to slow it down so much that every fight's got, 8 different waves and they've got to kill 20 things each turn, even though they came in groups of 5. Just keep it flexible and it'll keep your players on your toes, and I think it makes the battles seem a lot more fun. Now it's time for the homebrewed item of the week. This week's homebrewed item will be the Diviner's Dice. And this, you roll a d20 at dawn, and you can use that roll to replace one d20 roll at any time during the day, and this cannot be saved and resets at a long rest. I will make a note, if you have a divination mage in your party or at your table, do not add this item as it totally steps on what their special abilities are. But other than that, it's a fun little utility item. Add one to your game. I guarantee your players will love it. Okay, the fourth technique is going to be to just boost the stats of the monsters that you already have. And this is going to be one of the best abilities for a DM to have in their pocket, as it takes no prep work and just a little bit of practice to get the ratios right. And you can do this in 2 ways. If I'm looking for like an intense, fast combat, I like to add extra damage. And if I'm looking to like add rounds to the combat, I'll look to just add more HP and AC. So for a quick and intense fight, all you have to do is boost the DPS output of your monsters. And the goal here is to have the monsters basically get to take 1, maybe 2 turns, do a whole bunch of damage and die. And to accomplish this, I go about it in a few ways. I'll add an extra hit on a multi-attack, or I'll add an extra +2 to the monster's 2-hit stat so that they connect a little more often. And if you're feeling really spicy and want to add some extra cheddar in on top, you can put in like a rechargeable attack or extra rage damage. If it's like a big orc general, he gets, +4 instead of +2 onto the attack or whatever it is. But whatever you pick, you don't want this thing to stay alive for so long that it just nukes the whole party down. You want it to hit really freaking hard and then die. It's basically like a shock troop. And I like to use these before there's going to be a fight and the party won't be able to take a long or a short rest, because it kind of burns off some HP and they have to use a few spell slots. And then that kind of like hampers them a little bit before the fight's coming up. And I don't mean before like massive fights or big boss monsters. You don't want to you want the parties going in there like full bore and ready to rock. But this is a good way to burn off some resources just from a day to day, like when you have a random encounter or they're in a dungeon and come across some mobs. Beef up the attack and let it whittle them down a little quicker, but don't make it so that the monster lives forever and totally kills the party. The other way of boosting your monsters up on the fly is you can just add in some AC or add in some HP. And I opt for HP almost every single time. And the reason is that it is really boring and zilcho fun to just have miss after miss after miss when you're trying to fight a monster. It kind of takes the joy out of the game if you're just like, oh, well, I've went 3 rounds. And, if that happens, you end up with a lot of players losing interest in that fight. And this is why I opt for boosting the HP instead of the armor class, because you don't want the players to feel like, oh man, this is boring, and that's never the goal of any combat, and it shouldn't be a part of combat. Also, boosting HP is a good way if you've got areas in your campaign that have been kind of like skipped over. If you're playing like an open sandbox and you've already prepared stuff as a DM, and the party never got to it until they're like 3 levels too high, and you know that when they get there, the fights are going to be a half a round. Just double the HP on it instead of remaking all the stuff. It's a real quick skin. You just, boom, boom, and then the party can still go through it. It's probably not going to be hard because those lower CR monsters don't hit all that much, but it can save you a lot of time as a DM without having to redo an already finished part of your campaign. The other change I like to make to stat blocks that are real easy to do on the fly is just increase the saves that your monsters have, and this will give you a lot more rounds without them being able to be CC'd or taking full damage from all those casters, especially if you have a caster-heavy party. It also is good if you want, you can add in certain resistances. I have a party that does a lot of fire damage, and so at one point I had them fight a swarm of Kruthiks, and those are going to be super easy for them to be able to nuke down. and I didn't just want them all to get fireballed and be done. So I just reskinned these to be fire Kruthiks and added in fire immunity. And that was the only change I made to it. And it worked great because it forced them out of using their big AoE fire spells and getting hit with fireball and use other things. It made the fight tougher. It also made them kind of get out of their comfort zone and use other parts of their spell book. And if you have a caster heavy party, I would suggest doing that because there are a lot of spells in D&D that don't get used, and it's good to kind of like force people out of their comfort zone a bit so they see all the utility and abilities that they have. And I always think that's, a good thing to do as a DM to kind of get your characters to explore everything that their characters can do. All right, finally, there's no one to blame but yourself. This party is way too strong for all the crap that you can throw at them. Who gave out all these magic items? What a turd muncher. If this is a situation you find yourself in, there are a few fixes. You can do huge fights, lots of mobs, mini bosses, and then a main boss all on the same battlefield. And these can be fun occasionally, but they take a really long time to finish. The other option is you can just hunker down behind your DM screen, let the party run over everything that's out there, and not worry about it. Some groups will love this, and a lot of people are playing to just go out there, smash some faces, and if your party is too strong, it's okay to let them just keep beating everything into oblivion as long as they're having fun doing it. And if they are having fun doing it, then you're doing your job as a DM. However, and this is where I kind of fall in the discussion, if you think that the game is more fun if it has some challenge to it, then it's time to build some homebrewed monsters with unique abilities that challenge the party. This is one of those things that you kind of have to do to learn to do which sounds really silly, but if you go too hard, you can TPK the group, and while that is a perfectly acceptable outcome to a really hard battle, I don't think that's what any DM should be looking for. And the other side of the coin is that if you don't go hard enough at this, it's just another cakewalk, and they won't even notice that you made a completely unique monster for them. So here's my approach to making completely custom boss monsters. And I've got basically 7 steps that work as a good template, and then the monster will just be skinned to whatever it needs to be accordingly, if it's a dragon, or if it's going to be a giant, or whatever works for your campaign. If it's just another random humanoid character that has crazy magic abilities. But this template seems to work really well. And the first step for that is I make big HP pools for my homebrewed monsters. And this lets me ensure that I'm going to get to use the interesting things that I'm going to build into these baddies. And it keeps some paladin or warlock from coming up and just dropping a Nova round on it and nuking it in the first couple rounds. That way you get to actually fight with the stuff that you've built. The second thing is I will give it legendary resistances, just like the big baddies in the monster manual have. And I will probably give it proficiency and a couple of extra saves, add in dex and wisdom to keep you from being just controlled and CC'd the whole time. And I might add in a few immunities that are, appropriate for the monster. Like those fire Kruthiks that I talked about earlier. They weren't a boss, but I gave them fire immunity. If you got, a bad guy from, the far realm, he might be immune to cold damage or necrotic or whatever, something that's, class specific and works for the monster that you're using. All right, the third thing I do is I give out legendary reactions, just like, the big baddies get. But this is also where I kind of start to stray into the homebrew side of things. I normally make 2 sets of these, or make 2 big reactions that take like all 3 of my legendary reaction charges, but that can only be done once, like a one-off legendary reaction. So if you have the normal ones that are like 1 point, it takes an attack and moves half its speed without opportunity attacks, 2 points it can cast a cantrip, 3 points, so on and so forth. And then I will have a few special ones that you can use, but I keep these kind of in reserve if I need the fight to be harder. So like a 3-point cast, it might cast the last spell that was cast on it back at a random target, or it recharges its breath attack without having to roll. For these second tier ones, I just try to keep them on the flavor of whatever the big bad is. And here's the joy of these. You can have your legendary resistances that you get to use 3 per round, and then if the battle's going well, you don't have to use these. Or if it's getting out of hand really quick, you can start spending more of your legendary resistance points on these special ones that you kind of have stowed away. Or you could even do it like these activate once the monster's bloodied and hits 50% of its HP. But just whatever works for it, this gives you a little bit of mid-fight flexibility as a DM. And that's kind of important for bosses because there's really no take-backsies once you start. I mean, you're in it, and if it's too easy, they're still dead and you're still giving out loot. And then if you make it too hard, you need to be able to dial it back also. So this is a good way of doing that by having the two sets of them. It kind of gives you some flexibility if you need to up your damage output and survivability. You can use the special set, the second set of legendary reactions, and if not, you just stay on the normal ones and it works out great just like a normal boss fight. The fourth thing I do in this template, and it's very similar to the last one, is give your big baddie those layer actions. The whole name of the game here is always going to be turn economy, and you can lift these layer actions from other monsters or homebrew them up to be area specific for wherever you're going to be fighting. And I like to do these in a couple different ways. One is just like the book says, they go off at initiative 20, and that happens every round, and that's just the layer's turn. The other way I like to do this is I won't start using the layer actions until the boss is either bloodied, or if he had minions with it, once the minions die, it will then trigger layer actions. And I like this way because it doesn't overwhelm the party at the start of the battle, but it also keeps the fight from like snowballing in their favor super quickly. If you use it once they're bloodied, now the boss gets, it's a little more dire circumstances and it's pulling out all the stops. And so that's a nice way to kind of keep the balance of your fight going. And like I said, if you do they don't start at turn 20 every time, you don't have to use them if you don't need to. If you fire off layer action first round and round at initiative 20 mark, then you're going to do it every time, and the party's going to know you're kind of giving them a cupcake if you just all of a sudden like, oh, round 5 we got 2 people dead and the layer actions no longer go off. So if you keep these kind of in your pocket and have a trigger for them, it's a good way to make the fight feel fluid, but not like you're trying to like give them a softball to like hit out of the park. It keeps it hard, and it makes them feel, good about the fight that they're having, and it lets you kind of dial the fight into whatever difficulty level is appropriate for your party. The fifth thing I do with my homebrewed boss monsters is I have a backup plan. And that backup plan is for when everyone just blows the living crap out of that thing and it's dead, like round 3. I have a second HP pool that'll then be activated and makes the fight go on. And this wizard cries out to the far realm as he dies and opens a portal and is possessed by a great old one and now has necrotic and cold immunity and can fly. And mechanically, I work these stats out and how much HP I want there to be on the, basically round 2 of the boss. And I basically just keep that second stat block there with me. And if the fight goes way too easy right off the rip, and it's a situation where you needed a hard and challenging fight, just pop your monster's second wind and go back to work. And this can be really fun if you let a round pass as someone wants to go and loot that old turd caster, and then when they go over to body, they find out he's got blacked out eyes and tentacles are coming out of him. Now the party's all out of position, and you can just keep the same initiative and then resolve the fight. And I make one of these second wind type abilities for almost every homebrewed monster I'd use. And I would say I end up activating them about half the time. It's just good to have in your pocket because there's a lot of cooldowns, and when everybody goes Nova one round, you can have a lot of damage put out if you've got more than 5 people at a table. And so it's a good thing to have in your pocket. But just like the legendary reactions and the layer actions, you don't always have to use it. It's there at your disposal, but it's a lot easier to have it before you go into a big boss fight if you want to keep the fights challenging for your party than to be trying to make one up on the fly. And one of the other things I like to do when I get done with my homebrewed monsters, I pass the stat blocks around to the party. That way they can see all the things that the monster had, and they'll be like, oh, sometimes you didn't use this. And I was like, but it's a cool way of you made something, they fought it, and then you get to kind of share it with each other at the end. And they can see oh, you didn't just try to blow us out of the water for no reason, but you made it a really fun and challenging fight. I think that's a good technique to have as a DM if you have a really open table that communicates a lot about what's going on with it. And the sixth thing I like to do is I like to add something that is unique and this helps keep even experienced players off balance. For these, you kind of have to go out of the box and into your imagination, and you can do things that are like passive effects, like when this monster is hit, it's now immune to that damage for 1 round, or when it's hit with a different type of damage, it reflects part of it. Or you can do things that when you hit this monster with a spell, it auto silences as a reaction. And those are like interesting things that aren't really mechanically in the books that you can kind of add into it, and it makes it unique and interesting, and it'll keep players that have been playing D&D for years kind of on their toes because it's something new for them to fight against. I had one battle where I had like an artificer gnome that had kind of been taken over by AI. That's arcane intelligence. And when he took lightning damage, he absorbed it, and he could use it to power a massive attack I called a Fibonacci barrage. And he would fire like 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13 magic missiles whenever he was charged up. And it started off at the closest person and working away. This was totally out of blue for the party. They had no idea it was coming. And it was a great way to get a lot of like spread out damage into the group. And it was just a creative way I thought of like, hey, how can I like spread out the damage? Because, we have 8 players at our table. And so there's tanks up front, mid-range, and then long-range people. And it's really hard to ever get to the back line. This was a cool way of like, oh, they triggered this, it went off, and now the ability hit from closest to farthest away. So the people in the back took a lot of damage. And now the party's got to scramble, get healed up, worry about hitting it with lightning. And it was just something that kind of kept them on their toes that they weren't quite prepared for. And when I say make something unique, that's kind of the thing I'm talking about. Something that like the players don't see coming, but is like on flavor with the monster that they're fighting. And it just makes for really cool and fun D&D battles. So in recap, here's the template. 1, big HP pool. Make sure that baddie doesn't get nuked down in the first round. 2, legendary resistances, because why not? If you can have them, take them. 3, 2 sets of legendary actions. That way, if you need to use the big boys, you can. 4, layer actions, and same things. You can activate these later if you want the fight to be harder. 5 is a revive or some sort of second wind that if the fight goes over too quickly, you can have a resurrection take place and like fight number 2 come on. And then number 6 is something new and unique that'll keep even experienced players kind of on their toes and is unique to your monster and its flavor. And I think if you add these 6 things in or keep them in mind when you're trying to homebrew big baddies, you'll end up with some unique monsters and a lot of really interesting and fun fights that are be completely, custom to your D&D game and to your party. And I think that's one of the greatest things about DMing is the creativity that you get to have and all the stuff that you have to work with in this big game. Well, that's it for beefing up some monsters, and I hope this makes everyone's games more fun and more challenging, and that it keeps it interesting for you all, the DMs, and it gives you old players something new to fight. And as always, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Dragons and Dice. And if you're enjoying the show's material, please like, share, and comment and follow, or better yet, tell a fellow D&D buddy about the show. And until next time, may your D20s roll high, and may your DM monsters roll higher. Bye.